But first, we know now it was less medical science than political science that made Melbourne the world's most locked down city in the pandemic, with astonishing revelations today about taxpayer-funded polling that drove Daniel Andrews' every decision. Even though the devastation his lockdowns wrought on people, their jobs, their mental health, their kids' education wasn't enough to give Victoria better COVID death rates than any other state. In fact, in Victoria, they remained the worst in the country. At press conference after press conference, and there were well over 100 of them, Premier Daniel Andrews assured us that he was following the science. Well, in fact, as we now know, he was following the focus groups that said that frightened people supported every precaution. So go harder, go tougher, put more fear out there, Premier, and you'll get the political reward from all of that. So the polling helps you prove the more you scare, the more you improve your political popularity. For more than 2 years, the Victorian editor at the Australian, journalist Damon Johnson, has relentlessly pursued information about the taxpayer-funded pandemic polling run out of the Premier's private office. And for more than 2 of those years, the Andrews government has been fighting this freedom of information request. But with the state election now won and out of the way, the Andrews government has capitulated, releasing nearly 200 pages of documents and emails showing the extent to which Victoria's COVID response was driven by the pollsters and not fact-based health advice. Now, we already knew that since 2016, Victorian taxpayers had funded a mob called Kudos Research, a polling outfit run by a veteran Labor and Andrews-connected strategist John Armitage, to provide so-called feedback to the Premier's office. Now, let's call that feedback for what it is: taxpayer-funded polling by a trusted political operative into the Premier's private domain. Now, you would never get away with that in Canberra, but like so much else in Victoria, it's wrong, but the Premier does it anyway. And here's what we've learned from Johnston's dogged pursuit of the truth. That during the pandemic, Kudos Research monitored public reaction to such measures as the 8 p.m. curfew. We didn't even have that in wartime, but there you are, the curfew, the 5-kilometre travel limit, police conduct, and the management of botched hotel quarantine. While the Premier liked to declare over and over again that leadership is not about doing what's popular in the short term, leadership, he used to say, is about doing what's right.
It is not leadership to do what is popular in the short term. Leadership is doing what is right. And whether I'm criticised or praised, that is not my concern. My concern is to defeat this second wave.
Utter Andrews spin. Clearly, he was chasing the popular from the get-go. That's exactly what he was doing. Finding out what his pollster said was working, put more fear out there, as I said, and then do more of it, regardless of whether it stacked up against expert advice or not. Now, as Damon Johnson asks, if all you are doing is listening to the experts and treating a pandemic as a health crisis, why would you be obsessively gathering political intelligence? Now, I can answer that one for you, because this pandemic was always seen through a political lens by the Premier and the Premier's henchmen. It's why they used hotel quarantine as a make-work program rather than bring in the army and the police like they did in other states. It's why the Parliament was shut down lest tough questions be asked. It's why union workers could work during the pandemic, but others lost their jobs and thousands of small businesses went under. It's why the Coate inquiry into 801 deaths was a stage-managed sham.
I can't specifically recall whether I watched that press conference. I can't specifically recall whether Ms. Elliott could point to a particular provision in the Act.
Did you have anything else in mind about the work that had been being done for the purposes of a quarantine program?
Not that I specifically recall, no. I'm afraid I have tried to search my recall of this, and I simply can't. I can't provide you with detail as to why they're mentioned and others aren't.
So I take it from that answer, Premier, that you can't recall what precisely was in your mind about the enforcement model, if I might use that expression, at the time you made these remarks.
Yes, I cannot recall that.
That's all poll-driven spin, and we know it now to be true. It's why Daniel Andrews never pushed public servants to turn up to the office. He still hasn't done that, despite the hit to Melbourne CBD, because he wanted to lock in their vote at the November election, all driven by polls. And this wasn't taxpayer-funded polling run out of the public service. I want to make that clear. This is coordinated and run out of the Premier's private office. Again, something I say from experience would be illegal in Canberra. Every Victorian has a right today to feel that they've been played. And they have been played. This was as much about finding out what Victorians thought of the Premier during the lockdowns as it was our thoughts on wearing masks or living inside his ring of steel. Now, reading through the pages and pages of documents uncovered today, a lot of this, it looks like push polling to me. And on that score, it's worth noting that Kudos, this polling company connected to the Premier, reckons, and I quote, that public opinion, it says, is a fluid thing that we can squeeze, pump and stir. It's a business that boasts about its ability to shape public opinion as well as just gauge it. So it may be even that the government was driving a climate of fear rather than just responding to it. Now, you make your own assessment, but that's my view, confirmed by what we've now found out via these secret documents. As the Australian newspaper said today in its editorial, it should be no surprise that a captive audience, constantly fed a diet of fear, will reward those who say they're offering protection. But it says this is the stuff of cults. It reflects the Stockholm syndrome where hostages will sympathise with their captors. I'll say that again, Victoria. Given all the damage that COVID's done to public finances, as well as the individual well-being of Melburnians in particular, given that the response to COVID was arguably just as damaging as the disease itself, it was always going to be important to have a full Royal Commission into the pandemic and our response to it. Confirmation that the Victorian government was following political advice as much as it ever was following medical advice makes this Royal Commission just more urgent.